Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Court-Martail Podcast. Introducing your host for this evening first. He is the host with the most from the West Coast, the Bay Area-Brawler, Skylar Greenberg. And his partner, he has colonized, energized, and revolutionized the podcasting wrestling world today. Your Colonial champion, Sean McCarty.
Viva la Raza! Hello, ladies, gentlemen, children of all ages, as we come on this day, a couple days after Cinco de Mayo, and we come to the Court-Martail Podcast, and we're going to live that good life with some good old-fashioned Lucha Libre style wrestling, and arguably one of the greatest luchadors of all time. But let's go ahead and do our introductions. I am the man, the myth, the legend, the Bay Area Brawler, Skylar Greenberg, at your service. And I'm hosting today's show, as I promised I would, because I felt an inspiration to do this episode. And we're going to talk about it. And I'm with a man who is the cilantro to my onions. He is the Corona to my Heineken. He is the Frog Splash to my Three Amigos. He is Sean McCarty.
We don't care if you don't like us. Everybody wants to fight us.
Can you feel it?
Oh, man, it's nice to actually be in the passenger seat for a change, Sky. Is this the first show you've led this year?
I don't remember.
It might be. It might, because we've been so busy doing ACPW and NWL. We've been so busy reviewing crappy wrestling, which we're not going to be doing for WrestleMania Backlash. Enjoy it while you want to, folks. It ain't happening here. That it's about time that you are taking the driver's seat so I can text random people and hope that I can get that Tinder date I've been looking for.
And while you're looking for that Tinder date, we need to do some news of the week because we do have to talk about what's happening in modern wrestling.
Well,
so let's go ahead and get into it.
Coming straight to you from the Golden Gate Garage, this is the WrestleNews with Skylar Greenberg.
Surprise, folks! Because Skylar's in the driver's seat, that means I had the time to look at my phone and come up with the news, which means I will be your host for the news of the week with your Colonial champion, Sean McCarty, at your service. And we've had quite a few things happen in the past week or so, Sky. Are you ready?
I'm afraid.
You should be, because we're going to begin with a big tub of lard. A big, stupid tub of lard. Whose name is Ryback.
Okay, I was about to say, there's a lot of fat, stupid tubs of lard in wrestling. I need you to get more specific.
Well, I'm not trying to talk specifically about the fans this time. I'm trying to talk about somebody who was in the business. And that...
was in the business.
Was in the business. And this is the same guy who said, where should I go wrestle next? And 71% of the poll said, please retire. So...
No, it didn't say please. They just said retire,
yeah,
bitch.
Retire. Which, honestly, it's his fault for even making that an option. But in any case, Ryback, at this point, we thought he couldn't get stupider. Oh, no. So, a little context behind this. Vince McMahon's mother just recently passed away. I forget of what. And...
old age.
Yeah, she was, Vince McMahon is nearing 80. You can only imagine how old his mom was. Well, Ryback, ever the sensitive and empathetic human being, released a tweet that was shit on by pretty much every single professional wrestler, wrestling fan. Nobody liked this tweet. Would you like to hear the tweet? This is courtesy of Ringside News. And
all right, read the tweet.
And here's the tweet. At Vince McMahon, like most promoters, has the insatiable urge to have control. He had no control watching his mom get beat up as a child, which is a horrendous thing for a kid to witness, as their whore mom tries to make ends meet. Vince has failed to evolve. Fuck you, old man, winky face.
Okay. I want to be very clear about something, all right?
Please do.
I'm not the biggest fan of Vince McMahon's booking. And there have been times when I wanted him to step away, and I realized the only way he's going to step away is when he passes on. Do I actively wish that? Honestly, no.
No. Why would you?
Despite the jokes that I sometimes make,
yeah.
No, not really.
But who would... Let's be clear, folks. We said it, what was it, WrestleMania 38 review? That we said things won't change until Vince is dead. That doesn't mean that either of us wish death on Vince McMahon. We're not those kinds of people.
And I just want to say this right now to say that Ryback is that type of person. And Ryback, honestly, it shows a lot the fact that ever since you got released by WWE all those years ago, you haven't done anything in wrestling at all.
Because nobody wants it. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants to deal with that. I mean, it really started with Punk. When Punk said Ryback took 20 years off my career, and then he gets released, and then he asks for $5,000 an appearance, and then nobody booked him at all. Telling, isn't it?
Exactly. Again, I don't want to watch Ryback. Do you want to watch Ryback?
Oh, fuck no. There's nothing that Ryback brings to the table that some other idiot isn't already doing in professional wrestling. We don't.
It gets worse the more you learn about the person and the more he talks.
Yeah, and maybe he thought this was a good way to get heat, so that Tony Khan would be like, "You have heat, let's bring you in." That's not going to happen, Ryback. Go back to the deli at Wegmans and just live your life, bro, and maybe get off Twitter. Cause
okay, that's a great reference.
What, Wegmans?
Yes.
That grocery store is banger. That is one of the best grocery stores. If you ever have the opportunity, go find a Wegmans and go enjoy yourself. But not the one that Ryback's working at.
No.
No, because he'll call your mom a whore as he's cutting up your roast beef. So, let's move on, shall we? Let's get away from Ryback. I think he's gotten enough attention from us today.
But what other stupid things are happening in wrestling?
Well, we're going to move on to one of your favorite wrestlers, Cody Rhodes.
The hits just keep on coming.
Who was just on a recent edition of the Broken Skull Sessions with Steve Austin, and there were a couple interesting pieces here about his AEW departure. Would you like to hear the quotes?
Yes, sure.
All right. So, when it comes to his departure from AEW, he said that the decision to leave was an easy one because AEW simply didn't need him anymore. And this is, by the way, courtesy of Colby Faria of Wrestling Inc., who is reporting this news.
Had to give your plugs in.
That's right. Well, I got to give credit where credit's due. Current MLA format. Do not start adding me, Josh, again. I don't care about your English degree. No one cares about your English degree.
Ooh.
The quote. The bottom line was AEW was my baby. And it's growing up and people are having fun and it doesn't need me, if that makes any sense. Why I thought it didn't need me was, okay, I'm not being totally honest. Maybe it did need me, but here's what I needed. I didn't want to be a gatekeeper wrestler. I did not want to be this is Cody's thing, AEW. And some people look at it that way. Not everybody does. First program. They'll wrestle Cody Rhodes and then they'll do Chris Jericho's podcast. Laughs. There's a whole meme about it, and I just didn't want to be a gatekeeper. At the time, we were getting these kind of split reactions, which is not true, which was very fun and fun to experiment with because I had worked with John Cena on live events and to see how he did it and go, okay, all right, it takes a lot of discipline. I feel like to know when you can kind of give them, God, Cody cannot speak. I feel like to know, God Christ. I feel like to know when you can give them a little something or when you've got to stick to who you are and go, hey, you could do that. I'm going to stick to who I am.
You are right about the fact that English comes weirdly to Cody Rhodes.
It does. It's
like he's trying to almost speak like Dusty, but he doesn't have Dusty's charm when it comes to it.
He doesn't have Dusty's charm, and he also doesn't have Dusty's ability to make up words and people still buy it. There's more.
But, oh God, there is.
I just didn't want to be a gatekeeper, and I'll put it in the most simple of terms. It's right there, points to the WWE Championship. That's it. You have the Winged Eagle, which is the ultimate one, but when I grew up in the business wanting to be the WWE Champion, because it's the one that got away, right? We've spent a lot of time talking today about Dusty, and I can't let that escape me. It'll never escape me. The good, the bad, that's Dusty. He was a massive person in our industry, and I want to round it totally out. This one that got away from you, Dusty, but I don't want it to get away from me.
Okay, I don't know if they're ever gonna put the title on Cody. Like, here's the difficult thing, is that Cody did hit a ceiling in WWE in his last run when he was in the mid-card. I mean, I guess it's honorable in a way that he does want to achieve that goal, and it's a good thing because not enough wrestlers take world titles seriously. So it's good and refreshing to hear someone take the world title seriously.
However, the most over Cody was in WWE at all was during his feud that included Dusty. Which is kind of, I think, what they're trying to go for here as far as like riding the nostalgia wave. But at least if you're going to have Cody be on the hand and foot of Dusty's legacy, at least they're using that in gimmick rather than it just coming off as holier than thou, which is how it came off in AEW.
I think what it was is that he thought that he would be beloved by people, and he was for a time, until his real side started coming out. Now, because he's gone to WWE, and the fans there aren't as quite smart as they are in AEW, quote unquote.
Yeah, yeah, good use of quotes there.
They're not catching on to the whole thing of Cody's real life personality, which I don't know how to feel about it. Like, I want to like Cody Rhodes, but his bitch wife is not exactly doing a good job of making me want to like him.
That's a fair enough statement. And you wonder why we have not seen any Brandy on WWE television, because I think that WWE recognized that as well. And my fear about this whole thing, like, I think it's funny that Cody thinks that he got mixed reactions, because he totally didn't. He was getting booed out of the building. And he knows that. And I know he tried to kind of smooth that over by saying, oh, well, it was like 50-50. And I asked John Cena what that's like, which I'm not sure. Because John Cena got mixed reactions just like that. And Cody decided, like, I'm going to be authentic. But he, at the same time, was like, no, I'll never turn heel. And he said that on television. So it wasn't like John Cena where he would kind of tongue-in-cheek. Like, remember when he beat The Rock the second time at Mania? And he did that promo on Raw where he's like, oh, I'm going to do a little dance. I might do a little heel turn. And everyone's like, oh. You know, he was very tongue-in-cheek about it, where Cody's like, no, I'm not turning heel. He just...
Exactly. People don't want to cheer people they don't want to like. That's just how it is.
Yeah. And
you can't force them.
And while I think it would be, because Cody is taking it seriously, I hope that he will win the title, but I don't know if they have the faith in him to actually have him carry it. And is he the right guy to beat Roman Reigns? Who is the right guy to beat Roman Reigns at this point? It might have to be Cody, because who's left?
Drew McIntyre.
Okay, well, we're going to get to him shortly.
Bobby Lashley?
Bobby could, if they continue to build him correctly. But I'm not sure whether that's going to be what happens either. I mean, it's Bobby's in the middle of a feud with Omos and MVP, so it's not like they're going to push him right back into the title picture. And I don't know without MVP if he's going to get cheered the same way that he was before.
But people like Bobby Lashley now. That's the thing, is that a lot of people, even when he was a heel champion, people liked Bobby Lashley because he's so cool and awesome. So he is one of the guys can definitely get support. The real question is, how long are they going to continue with Roman Reigns' title reign? Because it's gone on too long.
Yeah,
He's almost at 2 years.
Well, it's interesting though, because a lot of it, when we think of the old school days where Bruno held the belt for 8 years, basically, and, Pedro held it for like a year and change, and Backlund held it for 3 years. It's not like long title reigns are out of the realm for WWE. It's just we have never seen one like this before, and we've never seen it from a heel champion like this before. So it's...
The other difference is that when you were talking about those ones, that was at the time when WWE was WWF, was a regional company, didn't have overexposure from TV and internets.
And also drew people into the building.
Yes, you can't compare the two eras.
That's fair.
The better comparison would be when John Cena was on top for like 400 or 500 days.
Yeah. And it's funny because even with Drew, who I thought held really well with the pandemic, they were getting sick of Drew after a while. You heard it at WrestleMania the year after when it was Drew and Bobby. It was kind of middling for Drew. And, even when you've got the kind of backing that, where the business has the faith in you and the fans definitely have the faith in you, it's a weird dynamic now. Things have changed. But speaking of Drew McIntyre, we will segue beautifully into our next piece of news, which is Drew's comments. And this is also from Colby Faria of Wrestling Inc. About
Colby getting over today.
Yes, that's right. Who talked a little bit about his creative frustrations in 2021.
Okay.
And I quote, "It got to a point where things went off track, in my opinion, a little bit." And he was talking to Alfonso Castillo of the New York Newsday during this interview. And it was hard to tell, without the live fans there, if it would have been okay. Right around the time I fought Lashley a couple times, I was telling these interesting, or not so interesting, Scottish stories. That period maybe was not one of my favorites. But hey, send me a challenge and I'm going to try and pull it off. Nonetheless, there was a period where I felt like this doesn't feel like it's quite working right. I remember I did an interview at Money in the Bank, the first live show with fans back in attendance. When I first popped up on the screens, I heard the big cheers, but I also heard some boos. And I try to be self-aware superstar in every way. And I'm a fan, so I feel like I have a good gauge about what's working and what's not working. And if someone told me, you're going to tell this glorious story about the Loch Ness Monster, I would have said, no, I'm not. So, I like that Drew McIntyre has some balls in that respect. And is at least cautious enough about his gimmick to where he's thinking about those kinds of things.
I mean, what has always Vince McMahon done with a person's character?
Made it
Strip
stupid.
them down to the common lowest denominator, sometimes stereotypically.
Almost always stereotypically. But yeah.
I mean, how far would it have been to go from Stone Cold Steve Austin being a badass to Stone Cold Steve Austin being a stereotype, which he was?
Yeah. Who would have thought Stone Cold Steve Austin being a badass to Stone Cold Steve Austin poorly playing guitar and doing comedy with Kurt Angle wasn't going to work? To the point where they needed the old Stone Cold.
Yeah.
Well, there's more.
Again, there's more.
There's more. But say what you're going to say before I move on.
I'm at least glad that Drew McIntyre is self-aware enough to know that some of the things he's doing is stupid. Whether he has the ability to stop those.
Well, and this is where the article continues. McIntyre, despite much speculation, says Vince McMahon never makes anybody do something they're against, which is why he had no issue in speaking up against what he deems as not so great creative. And I quote again, "I would not do something that I'm convinced is not going to work unless I'm told by the man himself, you're doing this. which he's not going to do. A lot of people would just take the paper and complain privately to people in the locker room, perhaps, or to themselves. And then, maybe down the line, if they're not with the company anymore, in interviews, rather than trying to work together with the creative writer you're with and saying, it doesn't feel like me, and if you really feel strongly about it, go to the boss himself. I know a lot of people are intimidated to go to Mr. McMahon, but in the end, he's the boss of the company where you work. In an office, if you want a promotion or if you have a significant question about your life and career, you go to the manager of the office. In our world, Vince gets the final say, and he's very open. His door is always open. He's always going to listen. If you feel strongly about something, he wants to hear your opinion because he wants the best show possible.
Okay. I personally speaking, I'm probably of the three of us, me, Joshua, and Sean, like Drew McIntyre the most.
I really like Drew McIntyre, but you're probably right.
I think I was first on the Drew McIntyre train. You were probably my co-pilot on that.
Yeah, close behind.
But these kind of quotes are, again, he's self-aware to know if there's something that's really, really stupid, he will stop it. It's almost refreshing because almost nobody nowadays is willing to stop something in Vince McMahon's track and say, no, I'm not doing this.
Right.
It's what old stars used to do. If they thought something was stupid enough and ruins their gimmick or their matches or whatever, they'll stop it. They'll put the anchor in it. Like, no, I'm not doing it.
No, fuck that. I'm not doing that. I'm telling you right now, I'm not doing that. And here's my thing, though, with this whole situation. I think that Drew is correct about Vince McMahon's approachability if you are already being considered a prominent part of the show. But I don't know if people who do not have that kind of standing with Vince have that kind of clout. Like, I believe that Drew can go in there and be like, that doesn't work for me, brother, and then they work out with that. But I don't think that somebody like Sarah Logan could have gone up and been like, nah, this creative's bullshit. And Vince would have been like, oh, okay, all right, fine, we'll make it better for you.
I mean, look at what's been going on with Mustafa Ali and all the things that he's been dealing with.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's a perfect point. That's a really good point. And now he's come back and what's his new gimmick? I can't remember what they called it. But it's
just
pretty bad.
I don't have no idea. It's just Mustafa Ali.
Yeah. And it's not great. And and that's the kind of thing where I think Drew, but it's interesting also that Drew kind of did a sly knock on a lot of the AEW talent who were former WWE guys and then went to just rant about and bitch about their problems on Jericho's podcast. Because that's pretty much what he said is like, people didn't bother to work it out. I almost feel like that was almost directly towards Moxley. But that's the whole thing is like, they don't try to work it out. So then they just go back and bitch about it. And then they wonder why they don't get over.
I mean, he's not wrong.
He's not wrong. It's just, I feel like that is a conditional situation though. And it really depends on how well Vince views you already.
It depends, yes, but it's one of those things where you have to work your way into Vince McMahon's good graces in order to get the opportunity. Because again, I'm sure there are guys who have the ability to say, no, I'm not doing this. Roman Reigns is probably there. Drew's probably there. Bobby Lashley's probably there. I assume guys like AJ Styles and Edge are there because they have the respect of Vince McMahon. It's not impossible.
No, it's not impossible, but you definitely need to have some, like Rollins probably has that. Becky's probably got that. Charlotte guaranteed has that. Sadly, Ronda probably has that, even though she couldn't give a fuck either way. But,
yeah, I don't know. Because the thing is that you are in Vince McMahon's good graces as long as you make him money. The second you are not making him money, he will kick you out the door.
Well, that's a fair point. And that's the interesting thing about the dynamic in WWE. But we're going to steer ourselves away from WWE for a moment. And we're going to go into two sad topics before we get into our final interview piece. And then we'll move on. I want to talk about this very briefly because kind of similar to the Ryback thing. I don't want to give this more attention than it deserves. Sonny was formally arrested for killing a 75-year-old man drunk driving. Faced 9 charges, 2 felonies, 1 manslaughter, I think another one, hold on. Blah, 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 a whole bunch of stuff. The 9 criminal charges, and a DUI. And then
it's DUI, involuntary manslaughter.
Yep. And then the other ones are like misdemeanors, like driving without a license she wasn't allowed to have. And this happened back in March, but she has formally been arrested, even though she has posted bail. But at this point, she's looking at about 30 years in prison. And God, I want to be sympathetic, but how many chances does somebody get?
It crosses the line when you kill someone.
Yeah, a 75-year-old man. A 75-year-old man drunk driving.
And it's not even that. It could be anybody.
Yeah.
Anybody could have been sitting in that car.
Yeah. And that was the thing. She hit a parked car at a stoplight going way too fucking fast. And it's just... I don't know. I don't know what to say about this at this point. I used to say, I hope Sonny gets the help she needs, but at this point, maybe significant jail time is what she needs.
It probably is, just for the safety of other people. And honestly, I'm looking forward to this Dark Side of the Ring episode. This could be... Sonny's life could be an entire season of Dark Side of the Ring.
Well, Sky, I wasn't going to break that news, but since you brought it up, Dark Side of the Ring has been canceled. They are now doing the 2 members of this who started Dark Side of the Ring are working on a new wrestling project, currently unannounced, currently untitled. But what we've got of Dark Side of the Ring is what we've got of Dark Side of the Ring.
I'm gonna cry.
You hate to see it. Well, you hate not to see it. Seeing it was really good, but now you can't see it.
It was really good.
Yeah?
I know that it's hard subject matter, but the documentary style, once they got into it, was really...
Well, you don't know what these 2 guys were feeling. Maybe they thought the concept was stale. Maybe they didn't want to... Maybe they were just getting so damn depressed about everything that it was... it was a little too much for them. Who knows what the real story is, why this got canned. But it's a shame. It is honestly a shame.
Fuck this gay earth.
And speaking of things that are a shame, we've got an update on Big E. This is once again, we are on Wrestling Inc. This is a S-A-I, that's his first name, Mohan article. And he took to Twitter to provide an update. The former WWE champion revealed his recovery may be taking a little longer than expected, stating that his C1 isn't healing optimally, and that he will need to spend another 4 to 6 weeks in a neck brace to avoid fusion surgery. Here's the tweet. For those desirous of an update, my C1 apparently isn't healing optimally. Well, she basically just quoted the tweet. I'll spend another 4 to 6 weeks in a brace in hopes that I can avoid a fusion. But don't you fret, I've got a tremendous support system, and what shall be, shall be. He's done. Calling it now. He's done. Go fuck yourself, Ridge Holland. Go fuck yourself.
It feels like getting it.
Yeah. I hate to say it, but I was hopeful that we'd be like, hey, this is actually going surprisingly well. Maybe things will happen. But to hear something like this after the usual time for something to this nature to recover is 3 months. But the fact that it's not going well tells me that even if his neck fully recovers, wrestling's out of the question.
Agreed.
Unless we're talking a 7-year hiatus like Edge had, it's not going to happen.
And it sucks because it's going to be in something that nobody's going to remember.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember the match. I didn't watch the match. I barely watched the spot because I couldn't. It just sucks. It just so sucks. Because whether you like Big E or not, whether you like the New Day or not, nobody deserves to have their career ended because some fuckwit doesn't know how to wrestle. And we'll see. We'll have, maybe we're wrong. Let's keep an optimistic look. Maybe things will go better. Maybe things will improve. We just don't know. All we know is it's going to take a little longer before we find out.
I again say the words I said before. Fuck this gay earth.
Well, not that there's anything wrong with being a gay earth, but...
And by gay, I mean happy, okay? Let's be very clear. By gay, I mean happy.
Yeah, you sure do, Sky. You sure do. Well, speaking of happy, we have got... Did you like Scooby-Doo growing up as a kid, Sky?
Yes, and I feel like you're about to ruin it, aren't you?
Well, Scooby-Doo made me happy. Too bad Butch is Scrappy-Doo. But that's unrelated to what I'm about to bring up, because
Whoa, what a weird turn that was.
So, we're going to talk about Scooby-Doo because Freddie Prinze Jr. is opening up about his plans for a wrestling promotion. This is an article, once again, Wrestling Inc., which is where I get most of my news, by, and forgive me, Danny, if I fuck up your last name here, Danny Wolstenholme. And this is a podcast that Freddie Prinze Jr. has, and he was talking about plans for a wrestling promotion that he's hoping to launch. Would you like to hear some of these paragraphs?
Go ahead.
All right. I started looking at arenas locally and what it would cost to rent them. And then, as I saw what my opportunities would be in this business, as there would be more of them after I did the Netflix holiday rom-com movie currently untitled, I started saying, well, I can accelerate that plan, or I could keep the plan as it is. Do a couple more of these movies and own the space, which I believe right now is the plan I'm going to execute. I already have a commercial realtor that I know and love. She's already looking at properties for me. I would love to have a full-time home for this. The plan was originally a 2-year plan. Now I should have the money for a 3-year plan, meaning it doesn't have to make money for 3 years. I'm not hiring anyone yet, so if your friends ask you if this story is true, you tell them yes, and you can send them the link to this episode so you don't have to have the 30-minute explanation. I plan on having this thing up and running in 18 months. That's my plan. There's a way for me to get it done sooner, but it requires me going to Australia for 3 months and leaving my family. So I'm not a big fan of doing that, regardless of how kind and respectful the studio is, unless I was in a position where I had to. I love being a dad, and that's the reason I walked away from the business in the first place. We will pause there before I continue on.
A lot to unpack there. So, you remember who Freddie Prinze is, right?
Yes, Freddie Prinze Jr. is actually Freddy from Scooby-Doo, but I was also on the WWE creative team, and I believe he was a guest host on Monday Night Raw, which is actually, I think, how he got the job.
Was he?
Yeah.
Was he part of that sham Raw general manager thing?
Yeah, that was when, after Donnie bought the company and then sold it back to Vince, and they just kept doing the guest host deal. That was the...
August 17th he was.
Yep. That is a fact. I remember that episode. He actually got, relatively involved. I believe that he had... I don't know if it was a match, but I know he got that backbreaker, neckbreaker combination from Orton.
Yeah, he got attacked from Randy Orton, but he had general manager powers, so he set up a lumberjack match.
Which, as I recall, was not very good at all, but that's lumberjack matches for you, at least in the modern WWE era. Even in 2009, they were losing their sting.
Okay, but anyways, the point is that he was with WWE for 2 years.
Right.
As a writer and producer.
Right. And then he decided to leave, obviously to spend time with his family, and now he's looking to become a promoter. And it looks like there's some stuff that's going on here. May I continue?
Go ahead.
I think I want to start it as a 2-hour show. I want my storylines based in reality. I want to give women and men equal time on the roster. And then my goal is to bring the show to television. And I mentioned this on Ariel Helwani's podcast, but it's important to me, so I'll say it again. I want it to be a SAG show. And what that means is, I want it to be a union show, which would mean each and every single one of my wrestlers would be a member of the Screen Actors Guild and be entitled to all the insurance and medical benefits and retirement plans that entails.
Okay, so let me go ahead and say something, all right?
Well, before you do, I've got one more paragraph, and then say your thought. So the goal is to get them all unionized, which is a big deal, he continued. I would support all wrestlers to go after it. It won't happen under Vince's rule, but I believe when WWE sells, that should be the very first thing that every single wrestler should have on the forefront of their goal list is unionize. Day one, it should be a walkout. The day they sell the company, the day they sell it to whoever the new ownership is, every wrestler should be like, good luck, we want unionization.
Okay, so I like what he's saying. What he's saying is very good. It is very ambitious, very creative, and ultimately we do need more options in professional wrestling.
Sure.
Can you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Are you ready for the butt?
I'm always ready for butts.
But doesn't that kind of sound like the same things that Tony Khan promised when they were forming AEW?
I believe that Freddie Prinze Jr. is vastly smarter than Tony Khan. That's my only rebuttal.
One of his quotes was very good when he said, I'm not a booker, so I probably will need to hire a booker to handle the wrestling side of it while I handle the business side of it. Which is perfectly fine, and again, smarter than Tony Khan.
It's going to be interesting to see, because the thing with the Screen Actors Guild, and this is something that I learned when I was in film school. That's what I went to college for. The Screen Actors Guild has a lot of very strange rules and regulations for what they approve and what they do not for their talent. So while there's a lot of benefits to being a SAG actor and you get the cute little card, there's a lot of business hoops that you have to jump in order to make that viable and feasible. And if you're going to do that, you better make sure that your talent is worth doing that for. You can't give Orange Cassidy a SAG card. You know what I'm saying? It's like you can't do that. You have to have people who you know you can rely on. And yes, giving them the benefits and all of the insurance and all of that, that's great. But that's going to be a headache on your part, Freddie. When it comes down to the logistics of the business, that's going to be a headache that I'm not positive he's prepared for.
I mean, ultimately, the whole thing is everyone wants the idealistic world. The idealistic. We all dream of basically the utopia, the whole thing of perfection. But you have to work with realities, and realities exist. The whole thing of, once WWE is sold, which I'm glad that he's sold on that idea as much as we are.
Yep, me too. Me too.
But the whole thing is that, yeah, WWE's going to sell. Everyone should walk out. No, not everybody's going to walk out.
No. Hulk Hogan's going to rat out to Vince McMahon, and then Jesse Ventura will get fired.
No, Vince McMahon.
Just going by history. But yeah, it's going to be difficult. I agree with Freddie. How many times have I said on this podcast, Sky, there needs to be a talent walkout? If it's not a union, it's just creatively speaking. But it's going to be hard to convince everybody to do that, and all you need is 3 or 4 top guys to be like, nah, that ain't happening. And that's going to make things much, much harder to make that happen in the WWE. Should it happen? Yes. Will it happen? I'm not so sure.
Right, but let's ignore WWE for a second. AEW promised a union. They don't have a union. They promised medical. To my knowledge, they don't have any medical. They promised equal opportunity for men and women. Look at the promotion they give their women versus the promotion they give their men, and you tell me whether or not it's equal opportunity for everybody.
But Sky, the women's have a secondary championship, which is actually more over than the women's championship right now because Jade Cargill is actually improving charismatically, and people want to see Jade Cargill. No disrespect to Thunder Rosa, it just hasn't worked.
It hasn't worked because they gave her a lackluster victory against Dr. Britt Baker, who in and of herself was not a very well-regarded women's champion. She was just regarded as the best the division was. It's just that, and they spent a lot of time and money to make Jade Cargill better.
It's true. It is true. But I will say this. Tony is absolutely unbelievably incompetent. Freddie Prinze Jr., I believe, he has some experience doing this, which is a big plus, and he's much better spoken. He very clearly knows how to be in front of a camera and can be a business delegation. And I think that if it was down to Tony Khan and Freddie Prinze Jr., who I would trust with the financial backing to start a wrestling promotion that might actually be worth a damn, I would trust Freddie Prinze Jr. over Tony Khan.
Every day of the week.
Every day of the week. But speaking of Tony Khan, and this is the last piece, and then we're going to move on because, like usual, my segments are very long-winded, and here we are 40 minutes into the podcast, and we're still talking about the news, but this is what happens. We've got some debuts, some returns, and some departures from both AEW and WWE. We don't have an intro for it because it's kind of a mixed bag.
Can we still play the WWE Releases theme song?
Oh, fine. Roll it.
So you've been released by the WWE. Best of luck in your future endeavors. You've been released by the WWE. And now you gotta go wrestle for Impact. You've been released by the WWE. Best of luck in your future endeavors. You've been released by the WWE. Damn, and now what?
Ow.
You gotta wrestle for Impact. Impact. And you know that pay gon' be so low.
Alright, we'll start with WWE, and there's really only one here that's interesting. Well, they're both interesting, but one of them is a request, and the other one is an actual release. Candice LeRae has been released from WWE.
Yeah, that's about what I expected.
Is anyone surprised?
No.
Does anyone care?
I'm sure Johnny cares.
Well, is Johnny here?
No, but
then
that's
fuck
what's
him.
money on the table.
So...
Whoa, what a conclusion.
Yeah. But as someone who's more important, Roderick Strong has requested his release. The final holdout.
I think you and me both said it, is that Roderick Strong's ceiling in WWE is not high.
Not without other people who elevate his charisma. And that's what both excites me and scares me about this prospect. Let's say he gets his release. You know where he's going. Do you want to see him make an ass out of himself with the rest of the undisputed assholes right now with AEW? I don't. They've already ruined themselves enough as it is. And I like fondly reminiscing about the good things about Roddy Strong than having to grit and bear through the garbage that Roddy would go through. Not that we're going to watch it, but still, just the concept.
Agreed.
Well, thankfully in AEW we've been saved because Stu Grayson has left AEW. For those of you who don't know who Stu Grayson is, Stu Grayson was the tag partner of Evil Uno, the originators of the Dark Order, back when we started. He was the only one I thought actually had potential of that group, and now he's the one that leaves first.
Can we get rid of the rest of them?
Why was he the first to go? Because he looked the best? Because he could actually work? Because I know that they don't like that kind of thing in AEW.
I mean...
Yeah, exactly. Well, don't worry about it, because instead, we got the return of Rey Fenix, who returned looking like Alex Abrahantes, looking like Darth Maul, and he did some flippy shit, and people kind of cared. But are you excited for Rey Fenix's return?
Please don't break your arm again.
Or, yeah, but don't go the route of Sammy. And then we have one more debut. And now this one is interesting to me because this tells me that the relationship between Impact and AEW might not be as over as it seems. Because MJF hired the services of W. Morrissey to take on Wardlow, also known as Big Cass.
It says something, though, when you have this and the crowd chants for Enzo Amore.
Well, half the crowd chanted for Enzo Amore.
And the other half told them to shut the fuck up.
Now,
and I agree with the other half.
Now, here's an interesting thing. You say what you want about Enzo as a person. If Enzo never wrestled and just was a manager and just talked, I wouldn't hate that.
Because that's what he should have been.
Because that's what he should have been. If he steps foot in the ring, I don't care about him at all. He had the promo skills. Nobody can dispute he had the promo skills. He doesn't have rap skills worth a damn, but he had promo skills. If he was coming back and Morrissey is really going to be there in AEW for any sort of length of time, if Enzo was there just as his mouthpiece, I don't think there'd be a problem. But what does this mean for what Morrissey's going to be a part of? And what does this mean for AEW's relationship with Impact? Because it's clearly not as gone as one would think.
Well, I said it before in a previous news of the week. I'd have to go back and find out which one, but we can look this stuff up later. I said that anyone who was on Impact who wanted to work with AEW, you had to negotiate on your own prerogative.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that's the whole thing. Like, does this matter? Maybe. But does it really matter? Let's be honest.
I'm not sure. All I know is that by the time that this airs, Impact had a pay-per-view on Saturday. Briscoes were on it. That's fun facts. That's really all I've got to say about that. And speaking of all I've got to say,
well,
that's my news of the week, Sky. It took almost 50 minutes to get through all of it, but there was a lot to talk about, and I left a lot out. But I'm sure that at this point, you're thinking, my God, this man talks so long. If only I could plug my ears with some nice earphones and listen to some quality music.
But the problem is that I'd be listening to music that you made.
Well, but that's actually kind of funny and ironic, but it's worth doing. And the reason it's worth doing is that Mother's Day is actually already happened. But if you want to say, hey, Ma, I love you so much, I'm going to give you a belated Mother's Day gift. I'm going to give you the music that could invigorate your soul. If you're feeling kind of meh today, you've got a cloudy day, it's raining out, you're feeling a little forlorn, let me give you something to spruce things up in a very exciting way, because it's time. It's time, it's springtime, and you know what that means. It's a new era in entertainment which has arrived. AB Productions CT is proud to drag you out of the superficial monotony and overproduced, oversimplified modern musical mud pit with two industry-busting artists springing into action and taking the world by storm. Abizzle and White Knux deliver an avant-garde approach to music that blends elements and instruments of a wide number of musical styles, including hip-hop, R&B, jazz, funk, dance, rock, house, EDM, and so much more. It is high time for the music industry to be shaken to its core, so be a part of the foundation-breaking movement by supporting aspiring artists. And right now, you can catch the latest release, The Wax Apocalypse, a 32-track album that took 2 years to come together. A saga of the ages awaits your eager ears, and stay tuned, folks, because in 3 weeks, May 27th, Live as One, the single from the upcoming White Knux album, released on October 14th, Just a Bit More, is going to be hitting each and every one of your live streaming platforms Look for Abizzle, spelled Abizzle, or White Knux, spelled White space Knux on SoundCloud, Apple Music, Spotify, SoundCloud, and so much more for this and the entire AB Productions CT discography of over 100 songs and projects. All just a short click away. Link in the description. Come join the entertainment revolution with AB Productions CT.
Now, Sean, I have a question for you and the music that you are releasing. That's coming in, what, a month or so?
About 3 weeks from the time of release.
So how long did it take you to come up with this one?
This one, usually when I write them in about the course of an hour or so, and then I record it in about, half an hour, so let's say 90 minutes to make this track, but it takes a long time for the gears to churn and all the distribution platforms to, sift through it, get it all situated so that on the 27th, its release is as quick and efficient as possible.
Well, that's good to hear, because again, I think you're probably a better rapper than Enzo Amore.
I would not dispute that. And I appreciate the compliment, although that's not a very high bar to go over. But the thing is, I will always be springboarding my way over the top rope repeatedly right into an arm drag into your earbuds. But that kind of movement, that fluid movement, happens to be a part of our topic today. Isn't it, Sky?
It is. So now that you have done the news thing for a little bit, let me take over. So
for a long
you can
bit.
Rest your vocal cords for a little bit.
Yes, sir.
So I picked this topic, Lucha Libre style wrestling. Now, let's be very clear. Me and Sean hate modern wrestling. And because of our hatred of modern wrestling, when we do these topics, unless something really necessitates us talking about modern wrestling, I really don't want to do it. So what I've been playing with is the idea of, let's go and do the classic territory deep dives, which we may do next month. We may pick a territory that's historic, and we may talk about its history as a topic. I'm sure you will be interested in that, Sean.
I would love that. I've been meaning to do that for years now.
Right. Or we can talk about a style of wrestling which has its own interesting little thing. And given that this is a couple days past Cinco de Mayo, I decided to pick Lucha Libre style wrestling, because Lucha Libre is one of the most interesting styles of wrestling that there is today. Now, Sean, when were you first introduced to Lucha Libre?
It's always encouraging when we are mispronouncing the name of the topic.
It's kind of difficult because we've been talking for an hour now.
It's true. So Lucha is one of those interesting things because there's a lot of elements in wrestling that have been taken from Lucha, particularly nowadays. Especially people who have no business doing Lucha. I would say that really it was the Eddie Guerreros and Rey Mysterios and really a lot of the people who segued themselves into the WCW Cruiserweight division and then eventually into WWE's Cruiserweight division that really introduced me to it. But in its purest form, I didn't really catch a whole ton of Lucha until really Lucha Underground, which was still kind of a hybrid when you think about it.
True. So allow me to give you a little bit of a history lesson about Lucha Libre.
I'm excited. Let's hear it.
So we can talk about wrestling styles, and there are several that we'll probably explore over the next few months as we pick them as topics. Obviously, wrestling is very basic in what it's telling, but different countries have had different styles of wrestling. Japan had Japanese strong style.
Yep.
Canada and the United Kingdom both developed a lot of submission-based style wrestling, and it catched on in the United States too. But their thing in Canada and the United Kingdom is catch-can style, technical submission style wrestling. In the United States, it's a lot of power, a lot of size, a lot of grappling focus, and also a little bit of showmanship. I would say American wrestlers probably have the best showmanship of the 5 different styles that are recognized. Is that fair?
And even in America, there were so many different forms of American style wrestling too. I mean, just what was going on in Texas was not the same thing that was going on in Memphis, which is not the same thing that was going on in Florida, which is not the same thing that was going on in Brody's promotion in Indianapolis or in Sheik's in Detroit. You know, all of those had a very different, unique style even though they were all grouped together into American wrestling.
Right, and that's the whole thing, is that wrestling, based on the area, the territory, the fans, the attitude, develop in different ways. And that's what it was for Mexico, because Mexico, they first started having wrestling dating back to 1863. And that's pretty far back as far as things go. But the industry didn't really start taking off until the early 1900s with a company known as Empresa Mexicana de Lucha Libre and CMLL.
Which is still around today.
Which is the oldest wrestling promotion, the oldest recognized wrestling promotion in the world. And it was kind of the same thing in the United States, how in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, that was kind of the genesis of wrestling. And in America, the big wrestler was Ed Strangler Lewis.
Yep.
Who was really famous. In that time, the big Mexican luchador was El Santo, a.k.a. The Saint, debuting in 1942. He was one of the first big luchadors that became really famous and really changed the way that everything was going, because at that time wrestling was respected, but it didn't have that impact until it had its first big public face.
And people don't recognize that El Santo was bigger than really any American wrestler ever. As far as pop culture phenomenon, El Santo was in Coco. The Disney Pixar movie, there was a mention of El Santo. That's how big El Santo was in the time. There was a point where he refused to take his mask off, which was, of course, I'm sure we'll talk about the masks here in a second. But El Santo was a phenomenon unlike any other. He was the draw to end all draws in Mexico. He was so beloved, probably one of the most famous Mexican stars. Not even just wrestling stars, but stars, period, in Mexico during the early days of Lucha Libre wrestling.
And his career was 5 decades.
Yeah.
He started in 1942. He didn't stop until the late 80s/early 90s.
Yep. Although he had significantly slowed down by year 45. You know, it wasn't like he was wrestling a full-time schedule every match the same way he was. But
right.
still.
But it's one of those things where, again, he's one of the big famous ones. And, of course, there are others. One of his biggest rivals, Blue Demon, Gory Guerrero, the patriarch of the Guerrero family.
Yep.
Mil Mascaras.
Yep.
A man of 1,000 masks.
Yep. All of these guys were huge, and they were really the top names. And they were guys that you could go anywhere, and even people in the States would recognize El Santo and Mil Mascaras. And, you know, there was a lot of play, and it was almost kind of surprising that you didn't see more of them appearing randomly in, like, Texas. Like, you didn't see a whole lot of them showing up for Fritz Von Erich, really, in Texas, or even in Houston. And that's a really surprising thing, because you consider with how close the parallels were and how big the stars were, you would have thought that there would have been a little more overlap.
I think part of it was just because Fritz was so focused on the Von Erichs, and that specific area, Houston, was always about the Von Erichs. But yeah, it's a little surprising that they didn't do more Texas, Arizona, even California to an extent.
Yeah. Yeah, and not to say that they didn't, because Mascaras got around to fucking everywhere, but it was definitely what they could have done. But I think also they recognized that it was going to be very difficult to convince people that it wasn't a clash of styles, and because kayfabe was so damn prevalent, they couldn't do anything that was such a clash of styles that it exposed everybody.
Right. The only way they were able to do Lucha Libre style matches is with other luchadors, because Lucha Libre very much developed the whole fast-paced style, aerial expertise. Now, let's be very clear about something, okay? Lucha Libre is not just high-flying. There's also a big component in technical work and technical grinding. It's just that the Flyers became the most famous and the most well-known, and unfortunately kind of influenced everybody today.
Yeah, and I think very similarly to American wrestling, very similar to Japanese strong style. A lot of the things that made all of those styles special have been lost because everybody's been trying to amalgamate the pieces of those styles without realizing why those styles were successful.
Exactly. Now, Lucha Libre is one of the more unique ones in that the way that they do their gimmicks is through their masks. A lot of luchadors, now most luchadors wear masks. And the whole thing with the mask is that you are putting on the mask, you are becoming this person, and there's a mystery, there's an element, there's a mystique with the wearing of the mask. Like you're either a hero or a villain. And it created a whole gimmick in Mexico, especially when you had the mask versus mask matches.
Which was, part of the highest honor, and you lost your mask. A lot of the times, that was the end of your career.
It was either the end of your career or you had to do the thing of go away for a little bit, wait, and then come back under a new name or a new mask.
Yeah. But as far as who you were at that point, that was gone. That's how important it became to the gimmick. That really was the essence of lucha kayfabe in a lot of ways.
Exactly. And the lucha kayfabe is so famous because luchadors, you cannot be seen without your mask, because without your mask, you are not the hero of the people.
Yeah.
Like El Santo, again, in public, always wore his mask. He didn't take off his mask until he was almost on his deathbed.
Yeah.
And he was buried in his mask, too.
Yeah. Because that's how important it was to him. Something that a guy like Mr. Wrestling 2, Johnny Walker, also kind of adhered to, just to kind of translate that over to modern wrestling, is that Johnny Walker, he wouldn't take his mask off until he was about 15, 20 miles away from whatever town he was in. And then when he was about 5 or 10 miles away from the next town, bam, mask going right back on. And he kept going. And so it did translate in small doses across the Rio Grande.
It just depended on the guys, because ultimately with wrestling, it's a melting pot. It's a lot of guys getting little bits of things from everywhere. It wasn't uncommon for guys in America to go to Mexico, and it wasn't uncommon for guys in Mexico to go to America and learn the different styles.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me, because then you get some people who go without the masks, and those people end up becoming massive heels, for one reason or another. And that eventually, to see, how the Guerreros eventually developed after Gory.
It's one of those things where luchadors don't have to wear the mask, and some wrestlers don't wear masks at all.
Right. But it's fascinating to me, and then all of a sudden, I think that in this modern era, the importance of the mask has been emphasized, but really it hasn't been treated the same way.
Well, Mexico, the main companies in Mexico are CMLL and AAA. Those are the big two.
Yeah.
The problem with Mexico nowadays is the same problem that's in America. There isn't a star who transcends the business the way that El Santo, Guerrero, Mil Mascaras, even guys like La Parca or Rey Mysterio do. Yeah.
And really that's a big part of it. Or Dr. Wagner Jr., another one who was really big, and definitely in the 80s and 90s in Lucha Libre. And then he made some random appearances in Japan and some random appearances in a lot of different places. He was in Lucha Underground for a couple, hot cup of coffee. And there are a lot of people who still view those masks, still respect those masks. And I think it's very telling that Rey Mysterio had to go back to his mask. Rey Mysterio Jr., that is. Rey Mysterio Sr., another luchador. Popular luchador. But Rey Mysterio Jr., remember when WCW took off the mask and he immediately had to go back to it once he joined WWE?
Yeah, because it killed him.
It did. And it's a shame, because honestly, the Filthy Animals was not the worst gimmick in the world, but nobody wanted to see Rey Mysterio's face as just his face.
Because Rey's always had a better look with the mask on. It made him different.
Yeah, and it set him apart, especially when he was having some of the best matches in WCW.
And when it translated to WWE. And he's one of the very rare luchadors that can work the luchador style and also do the American style.
Well, and I'm going to make kind of a bold statement here, but Rey Mysterio is probably the greatest American luchador. As far as coming in to the business, really making a statement in American pro wrestling and having a career that lasted this long in American wrestling. Say what you want about what's going on with Dominic right now, but Rey still gets cheered because Rey's that over. Rey's that important as the legacy holder of Lucha Libre style in American wrestling. To this day, he will always be the benchmark of, especially to modern fans of Lucha wrestling. Even though there are many, many, many others who drew much, much more money before him, he is now the poster child of Lucha Libre for a modern audience.
Right. It helped that he was part of that famous WCW Cruiserweight division, which introduced Lucha Libre to a lot of people in America.
Yep.
And he's had such a longevity in WWE. And even the time that he spent in Lucha Underground, which Lucha Underground is one of the most fascinating case studies of trying to do Lucha in America specifically.
Which I thought, we've kind of talked about it a lot. A lot of the gimmicks worked in Lucha Underground. A lot of the gimmicks they had. But then you turn them into just regular American audience. Like, think about how valuable Pentagon Jr. was in Lucha Underground and how he just feels like absolutely nothing now.
I mean, Prince Puma is another one.
Yeah.
He was built up in Lucha Underground, and he was one of the big names of Lucha Underground for a very long time.
Yeah.
And then he's just Ricochet.
And nobody gave a fuck when he was Ricochet. Even when he wrestled Will Ospreay in that match where they did a whole bunch of dancing.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So, but with Prince Puma, with the Lucha style, it worked. Under a Mask, it worked. But I will never forget just this small moment about Lucha Underground. It was actually when Rey Mysterio, and I think it might have been Dragon Azteca Jr., were looking for their third man for the 6-man tag, or the trios match. And they finally had Prince Puma talk after not talking for a year and a half. And Rey Mysterio's like, we're going to kick some butt. Dragon Azteca's like, we're going to kick some butt. And it was like, and we got the skills to do it. And then the first words we hear out of Prince Puma's mouth in the most southern drawl accent you could possibly hear was, damn right we do. Oh, I wish he didn't speak. I just wish he just didn't let him speak.
I know it sucks. And again, there's a lot more in Lucha Libre that we probably didn't get into. We didn't talk about the special things they do with tag matches and trios matches, which is its own amalgamation of tag team wrestling that Lucha is famous for. We can get into the whole history thing, but Lucha Libre is one of the most important things to Mexican culture, and it's not going away anytime soon. And
here's the final, if we're gonna we'll put a pin in this, and we'll definitely get back to some more specific Lucha Libre and watch some Lucha matches and get into that. So this is kind of our blanket overview before we do dive into this on another day a little bit further. But I will say, Lucha is simultaneously one of the coolest things in wrestling, but also one of the worst things to happen to wrestling. Because now everyone who shouldn't be doing Lucha is trying to do Lucha. And it just doesn't work. And now we get 25 minutes of non-stop flips and jumps and just endless moves, which with Lucha in the old days, there was sense to it. But now it's just another thing to do.
Again, just like the wrestler that we're about to talk about, there's more to him than just a splash.
Or suplexes.
But the only way we're going to find that out is by watching one of the biggest moments in his career, and we're going to watch it in this match of the week. Roll it.
What time is it? It's the fight, it's the brawl, it's the match of the week. It's tonight, watch along with the son of a beat. It's one fall, the down for the 1, 2, and 3. So don't stall, hang on to the edge of your seat. We got a punch and a flip and a powerbomb too. All the moves and the stars are all under review. See the baby face cheered and the heels get heat. This is wrestling at its peak. It's the match of the week.
2004, No Way Out, Daly City, the Cow Palace, a Beast, and a Guerrero. That's right, it is Brock Lesnar versus Eddie Guerrero for the WWE Championship, WWE No Way Out 2004 on the road to WrestleMania 20. Eddie Guerrero getting his shot at Brock Lesnar. Sean, what did you think?
This match was amazing. It was. Long, but amazing. The thing I noticed the most is what we saw at Unforgiven. This whole match has an intensity level that is so missing from modern wrestling. Every move hurt, every action had purpose, every shot was laid in, whether it was meant to or not. And even when they missed moves, they were too over for the people to give a fuck.
I mean, that's the whole thing, is that when we were watching Unforgiven, I was like, I want to watch more of this Brock Lesnar because I don't want to see post-2012 Brock Lesnar anymore. I'm tired of it.
Yeah, but I will say this, though. Even though there were a lot more moves and there was a lot more diversity in the submissions, this match is more reminiscent of modern Brock Lesnar than the 2002 Brock Lesnar we watched against The Undertaker.
But it's still good, and there's still more distinctness to this Brock Lesnar. And also, I love watching Eddie Guerrero. Like, we have not done an Eddie Guerrero match of the week. In fact, that No Way Out match, that Unforgiven match with Edge was the first Eddie Guerrero match we watched, and that's a shame.
It is a shame. Because like you said in the intro, there is so much more to Eddie Guerrero than just his key hits that everybody does nowadays that they cannot stop saying, just like Eddie.
Yep. Now, Sean, shall I ask the question?
Please do.
Did this match start with a collar and elbow tie-up?
You bet your ass it did.
And not just one, but multiple.
Yeah. Which also is kind of stupid on Eddie's part because it's Brock Lesnar, but it's how you start a match.
Well, it probably would have been smarter for Eddie to try and do a turnaround and then do a standing side switch.
Didn't matter, though, because, and here's the thing, this is the main event of a No Way Out pay-per-view that saw a lot of shenanigans in play, so the crowd was a little tired to start this match, but they got way more into it the more it went.
Exactly. Again, the people were behind Eddie at this point, and they wanted to see him win, but the problem is that Brock Lesnar is a physical specimen. He's bigger than Eddie, he's faster than Eddie, and he's ruthless than Eddie. And
I think I think that's part of why the crowd wasn't into this at first, because everyone was like, there's no way Eddie's winning this. There's no way they're going to do that. Right? Well, it started out, and I miss Cole and Taz, man. More I hear them, the more I'm like, God, they were good. Cole actually getting moves right. Taz analyzing and breaking down little intricacies on the moves. Like, this is what a commentary team should be.
I mean, again, this is one of the times where I can listen to a match and I don't have to have it on mute.
Yeah. And it was great. Although I do have to say there was one point that I think it was a botch, but it looked so devastating I didn't really care. And that's when Brock caught Eddie off the top and, like, pretty much, like, he almost powerbombed him, but he just landed Eddie square in his head. And then he did the airplane toss while he's in that powerbomb position.
But, again, it's like Cole and Taz called it. Yeah, Brock Lesnar got the back of Eddie's head on the ground, and now he's going to spin him around like a lawn dart.
Yeah, it was... And again, that was the kind of intensity, but you would never see modern Brock do that. Ever.
Modern Brock doesn't do anything more than Germans, Kimura, F5, Bob's your uncle.
And you know, I hate to agree with Moxley, but when Moxley said that Brock wanted to be lazy, I mean... Brock found a formula and has not strayed from that formula for 6 years.
No.
8 years. 8 years.
9. 10. It's 10 years.
Yo, you're right.
10 years to the day that Brock has come back to WWE.
Well, but there was more to Brock when he was wrestling Triple H and John Cena, though. It was really the John Cena match at SummerSlam that started that.
Okay, that is fair. That's true.
So, because even when Brock faced Taker and beat the streak, it wasn't quite as dramatic as it ended up being after he beat John Cena. But in any case...
Fair enough.
But this Brock was doing a lot of stuff. He was going everywhere. You know, and I loved the whole breaking up the count out just by stopping Eddie from getting back in.
Right. which is a cocky, arrogant heel move, and it ultimately hurts him because Eddie grabs his leg, pulls it over to the ring post, and starts working on the knee.
Yep. At which point we get a good, probably the one and only fan sign that has ever had the name Marty Jannetty on it. Did you notice that right in the front? Marty Jannetty fan. You know what? Good for you, guy, because you might be the only one.
I was dying when I saw that.
I was like, wow, okay. All right, cool.
Are we sure that wasn't Marty Jannetty?
You know what? I didn't get a good look at the face. So you may very well be right. It could have just been Marty himself. That's good. Brock does not get nearly enough credit for his selling ability, even at this point.
I mean, he's an underrated seller.
Yeah. He did a really good job of, like, it wasn't necessarily constant, but when the knee needed to be sold, he sold it.
Well, that's the whole thing, is that whenever Eddie worked on the knee, there was like a little bit of hope, like, he's got him down. He's slowing him down. Eddie's doing damage.
Yeah. And it always looked effective. It always felt effective because of the way that Brock was selling it. And even when Brock got up and got a big belly to belly, and the longer it went, the more fatigued that Brock looked.
I mean, the whole thing that you've always complained about modern wrestling, it looks like a struggle. It looks like a fight. It looks like competition. And
it did. You know, this match was clunky, but it was clunky in a good way. And there is a difference
there. It was clunky in the way of being believable.
Yeah. And now I have to do something I don't know if I've ever done in the history of the Court-Martail podcast.
Uh-oh. Okay, hold on, everyone. Get your seatbelts in. Go ahead and strap that in. Sean, say it.
I'm going to compliment Kevin Dunn.
What?
That's right. For the first time ever, I'm going to compliment Kevin Dunn. Here's why. Because Eddie gets Brock onto the outside. And I believe it was because he knocked him into the corner, or he hit it. Oh, it was Brock missing the high knee. Right? He hits the high knee. The knee hits the turnbuckle. He rolls over the top, crashes, and burns and sells. So they go to a picture-in-picture. But before the replay starts, Eddie dives on top of Brock, and Kevin Dunn waits to start the replay until that move has had the time to register. And then starts the replay so you can see what happened before. The fact that he had the wherewithal once in 148,000 times to wait until a move happened live to hit that replay, good job, Kevin.
Amazing.
That's.
Can we laugh at the fact that Eddie Guerrero does the figure four and the STF better than Ric Flair and John Cena?
Well, it's difficult because Eddie tried so hard to hit that figure four, but he realized it was taking too long, so Brock had to kick him off like 2 or 3 times, and they just kept going with the match, and they just eventually went back to it, which I assume was a move that they decided to just call an audible and just say, we'll get back to that figure four eventually, because they took another 2 or 3 minutes of action, and then they finally got back to it. But that's something that's also lost in modern wrestling. All right, screw it. We'll get back to it. Let's just keep going. Instead of, oh, no, this wasn't part of the plan. Let's just, run and act like we took a bump, even though Marco Stunt is somewhere over in La La Land. I'm still going to take a bump into the post because that's what I'm supposed to do, Evil Uno.
Boo.
Yeah. You remember that?
I remember it.
Yeah.
But that's the whole thing about wrestling, though, is that the way they did it, Eddie does a drop kick to the knee, grabs the leg, does the figure four. It's setting up the move again, so it's not just gratuitously, oh, I'm going to keep trying to make it work until it doesn't work.
Right. And again, that moment where it's not working, all right, Brock, kick me off. Let's get back to this eventually. I love that he did an STF on both sides. And Taz's explanation of what an STF is, what it stands for, why it's effective. Again, that we don't deserve Taz on commentary. He's that good.
It's not just that, too. Eddie tries to do the lasso from El Paso, but he can't quite get it, but he realizes he's in position for the STF.
Yep. And we kind of glossed over something, too, is that when both of those guys were out of the ring at that dive, that I was mentioning before that Kevin Dunn actually got before the replay, the referee counts to 9 and they both barely get back in, but it looks like it was a struggle to get up there from both individuals. That is how you beat a 10 count convincingly at the count of 9. Not sit there until 9, jump up and get back in. Bianca.
Exactly. Okay, exactly. Now, here's the thing, is that Brock Lesnar, even when he's doing the submission moves, every time he does a power move, it's awesome. That gut wrench.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. I really liked that. The big gut wrench. I loved when he got that crossface chicken wing that he converted into that rear naked choke. And that was another really good one. You know, Brock had a lot of move diversity here because I think Eddie was bringing out the best in Brock. Because Eddie has such a unique offense. We mentioned it during the match with Edge. He's got such a unique offensive balance of what he wants to do and what he can do. And that really makes a difference as to how you view and perceive how the match goes, because they're both trying to go submission for submission. But when they do, they're working on different things.
Yep. It's also one of the things where with Eddie is that he can do almost anything. That's the beauty of Eddie Guerrero.
Yeah.
That he can do the high intensity luchador style moves like the head scissor takeover.
Yep.
He can do all the submission catch can stuff because he's wrestled guys like Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit. So he's perfectly equipped to handle those moments.
Yeah, speaking of Chris Benoit, did you notice when the audio cut out for like 30 to 45 seconds? I almost guarantee you they were talking about Chris Benoit winning earlier in the night. I guarantee you that's what they were talking about.
Probably.
But in any case, they finally get did you notice that when Lesnar went for the cover, anytime he went for the cover, he hooked the leg but also hooked Eddie's hand and pressed him down. Like, that's a proper cover. One of the things in modern wrestling I got real sick of is the leaning back on somebody and hooking the leg like that, but not having any way to hold the shoulder down. And Triple H is the one who started that, by the way. He's the one who did that the most. And I wish he didn't do that, because now everyone's modern covers are lazy. But that cover from Brock, I was like, that is a pinfall attempt.
Yeah.
It's the little things, folks.
It's the little things. We're going to skip a lot. Honestly, guys, this is on YouTube. Watch this match, okay?
Yeah.
Me and Sean cannot do it justice.
Yeah, I would have live streamed this if there weren't going to be a billion ads in it. Which, as with most WWE matches, they just, every 4 minutes, just, here's a 15-second unskippable, or 2-second unskippables, or a 34-minute skippable. We don't know. Yours is going to be different than mine, so how can we possibly watch the match together when they're going to do that?
Because you pay for YouTube Red, so you don't have to deal with the commercials.
Yeah, I'll get right on that.
But again, we are 23 to 24 minutes in the match. Eddie Guerrero can barely do the Three Amigos.
Yeah, because it looked like fatigue was setting in. And notice that neither of those guys were blown up either, because their cardio's that good. You know, that they were...
It wasn't just that their cardio was that good, but they allowed time for moves to register. When Eddie did the Three Amigos, he's going for the frog splash. The people were in the match by that point.
Yeah, and this is after that really unique positioning on Brock Lesnar's bear hug, where he basically did it not from the back, but like from the side, but still, like, it still looked just as devastating. Why does he not do that more frequently nowadays? He already does half of it going into Germans.
I hate to say it, but John Moxley is right. Brock is a little lazy. He doesn't want to do... I mean, I get it. Work for little so you can get more. It is what it is. When Brock Lesnar does this F5 and the ref bump,
Vintage.
how did you feel about it?
It's vintage Brock Lesnar match, really.
That kind of feels like that's the only kind of part of the match I kind of didn't like is #bad formatting. Because when Brock does the F5 and Brian Hebner... It's not Brian Hebner, is it?
Yeah, it was.
Well, yeah, it was. Brian Hebner is in position to take it. I'm just like, okay, ref bump.
You know, that wasn't even my issue with it. But Brian Hebner got beaten down 3 times in that Lesnar and Undertaker match and got back up in pretty short order. So why is it that 2 boots to the face knocked him out worse than if he got hit with a soldering iron?
The difference is that Brock Lesnar is doing the F5, which is his finishing maneuver, and he's spinning Eddie Guerrero so fast that it's basically he was lawn darting him.
Yeah, I suppose. But that's actually where I wrote down, this is more reminiscent of a modern Brock with extra moves than the previous match that we watched. Then we get my favorite phrase in all of pro wrestling.
Which is?
What do I have to do?
Yes, but this was a time when you could say that, and it worked.
Yeah, at least it was 26 minutes into the match, and then it makes sense, as opposed to Byron saying it after 10 minutes in every match.
Yep. And speaking of, Brock Lesnar takes the opportunity to grab the title belt. Looks like he's about to hit Eddie Guerrero over the head until he comes.
Your favorite. The Jewish icon to wrestling fans everywhere, Goldberg. With his spear, which got a pop. And then he left. And I don't know if this was before they knew that Brock and Goldberg were both leaving. I think people thought Goldberg was still was still staying. I think people knew Brock was leaving, but I don't think they knew that Goldberg was leaving yet.
They didn't know that Goldberg was leaving, so there was excitement because maybe if Goldberg wins, they'll do something, but the false finish that came after that was awesome. Where Eddie comes over, goes for the cover, 1-2 kick out, and the fans go ballistic. And also, it's cool that it didn't lead to the finish of the match directly, because it would have sucked for this match to be decided by Goldberg's spear. They were able to wrestle a little bit more. Yeah, because then Eddie goes to hit him with the belt. Brock ducks it. He tries to hit an F5, but he's down to one knee because his knee hurts. Eddie converts it to a belt, DDT on the belt, which was nowhere near the belt, but who cares? They're both over. Eddie tosses... Eddie tosses the belt. It lands back on his face, so he has to grab the belt and toss it again. Yep. Didn't matter. Gets up 5-star. What is this, Van Dam? Hits a frog splash. Gets the pin. Hold on. The crowd goes ballistic. Hold on. You made a point, and it really was signified in the 2 frog splashes and the F5s. Whenever someone does flash photography, it's so cool. It's so much cooler. It's one of the things that it's like one of those unintentional losses in modern wrestling, just because nobody has flashes on their phones anymore. Nowhere near the same way. And it was a sign of the times. It was one of the best parts of the times, and it's something that we lost just because technology outlapped it. But then the crowd cheers. The crowd goes nuts. Eddie hugs his mom and dad. Eddie jumps into the crowd with adrenaline. He's just... Security pulls his ass back out. Yeah, no, but it was great. I love when Cole loses his voice with excitement. I mean, it was cool. He was cheering for Eddie, like, come on, Eddie. Yeah. Come on, Eddie. Yeah, the only time that I've heard Cole have that kind of excitement in the past 10 years was when Pat McAfee was fighting Austin Theory before, the rest of it. I'm starting to like older Cole because when he was younger, he had the energy. When it was with Mankind, this one, Daniel Bryan, when Cole is into a match or into a segment or situation, he's into it. Older Cole has passion. Modern Cole is lifeless. Is completely lifeless. And that's the biggest difference. It's that this Cole actually had enthusiasm for what he was doing. I don't think he has that anymore. No. And that's really the shame, because a guy like Eddie deserves that kind of passion. Because Eddie himself was so incredibly passionate as a human being and deserved every accolade that he was able to get. And I think this is a good time to go into the superstar spotlight. I mean, you can already tell it's Eddie Guerrero. Yeah, and Eddie had a very long career before it was cut short. Who knows
how long Eddie would have kept going if he hadn't passed. But he was already pretty old by the time that that even happened.
Yep. Now, you made your controversial statement about Rey Mysterio being the greatest luchador of all time. I would argue it's Eddie.
I think Eddie has left an equally large impact, but here's my statement. I don't think that Eddie would have had that same impact had he lasted longer.
I would argue he would, because he would have been able to do more. But I think it's difficult because, yeah, Rey is bigger now. Well,
okay, I will say
this.
I will counter with this, because I would say that you might be right, because a big part of what made Rey was Eddie dying.
That, and also people still pay tribute to Eddie Guerrero to this day.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, this is a very good debate, and we will eventually have this debate again at some point. Maybe when we watch an Eddie Guerrero-Rey Mysterio match.
I'd be down for that if we get a good one. I mean, I'd love to watch that Halloween Havoc match they had. I've seen it like 12 times. I don't care. I'll watch it again.
I know. I've seen this Brock Lesnar-Eddie Guerrero match 10 times this week, but I'm willing to watch it at 11th or 12th time.
Yeah. When the match is that good, you don't care.
Yep. So Eddie Guerrero has a very interesting career, as you said. He did train in Mexico, obviously, in both CMLL and AAA.
Yep. And he had the family legacy. You know, he's basically a member of the equivalent of the Hearts in Canada, or the Guerreros.
I would actually make the argument that Gory Guerrero is Mexico's version of Fritz, and all of his sons are the different Guerrero sons. But I would argue that Eddie probably is Kerry Von Erich.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison, I'd say, because unfortunately, you know, Hector got the short straws, the gobbledygooker, and
Chavo got the I'm too short and uninteresting.
Well, Chavo Senior definitely had his moments, but I don't think he had the level of charisma that Eddie did by any means. You know, and that was, I think, a big part.
It's not a knock.
No,
it's just Eddie's that good.
Yeah, it's like, you know, it's like kind of like Kevin. Kevin was a good wrestler, but he did not have the charisma that Kerry had. You know, and that's no knock on Kevin, because Kevin is a very good wrestler. It's just that some people have that little extra piece more than not. And that's what Eddie ended up having.
Right. Now, Eddie Guerrero began wrestling in 1986 through 1996. He wrestled for CMLL, AAA, New Japan. There's even some stuff of him in ECW, which I found interesting.
You should watch his ECW work. My God, it's good.
Especially with Dean Malenko.
Yeah, although I have to say his American tights are not that good.
Well, they got better later on.
But he himself was very good. I remember watching a couple matches with him and Dean that were incredibly good. And it's really a big part of why ECW really took off, were those kinds of matches. It was none of the extreme stuff. That came afterwards.
The extreme stuff got over later on, but the early stuff of ECW and the things that people forget because they all want the tables is that there was actually some good wrestling, like good wrestling there.
Really good wrestling.
Now, Wrestling What If. Are you ready for this challenge?
Yes, let's hear it.
What had happened if Eddie Guerrero had stayed in ECW? Because people wanted him to stay in ECW. It was just a dispute between him and Paul Heyman.
Well, I don't think that... I think eventually Bischoff would have pulled Eddie away. If it weren't a dispute between Eddie and Paul, it would have been financial.
That's fair.
I think that Bischoff would eventually have lured Eddie away with enough money where he would have been like, all right, Paul, it's no disrespect, but like he's offering me like triple what you're offering me, and his checks are arriving on time. I can't not do that. You know, I got a family to provide for. So I think inevitably he still would have ended up in WCW, because I don't think WWE would have been interested otherwise.
That's fair. Now, we go to WCW. and the cruiserweight division matches with Eddie Guerrero and the other luchadors that were part of that division that really made it good. Juventud Guerrera, Super Crazy, Rey Mysterio Jr.
Juvi does not get enough credit at all because everyone just assumes that he's like that guy who was part of the Mexicools with Super Crazy and Psychosis. And, you know, they think of the tractor driving. You were talking about Vince McMahon stereotypes before. Everybody kind of views Juvi as just that. He showed up for a hot cup of coffee and left. Pre-losing the mask, Juventud Guerrero was one of the most captivating luchadors in the cruiserweight division.
And really, Juvi is the guy who was very solid as a hand and really helped make that division. Like, we talk about the top stars, but Juventud Guerrera is the guy who could wrestle a match with anybody and it'd come out good.
Yeah. Juvi and Kidman had a great... Juvi and Jericho before the 5 labors of Jericho, whatever the fuck that was. But back in 96... Back in 96, Juvi and Jericho had a hell of a feud. As Jericho was starting to get over as a really obnoxious heel in that division, Juvi was a great babyface counter for him. And Eddie was a great heel that had Rey Mysterio, hence that Halloween Havoc match we talked about. That's many accounts to this day stole that show.
It was maybe it was and the thing too is that it was a Luchas de Espuchas title versus mask match. Eddie bet his title, Rey bet his mask.
Yeah,
and that's why the mask matters. Because again, in Lucha Libre, sometimes the mask is more important than the title.
Yeah.
That's how important it is.
Yeah, and that's why in that match, a big part of that match was Eddie ripping the mask of Rey Mysterio. And trying to, you know, to pull that away, you know, to blind Eddie or to blind Rey so that he wouldn't be able to see. You know, that was a huge part of it.
I mean, it's part of Lucha is that it's another gimmick and another way to manipulate another wrestler. You try to take off the mask during a match, you get heat.
Yeah. And Eddie, he had success. He won the Cruiserweight title, as you mentioned.
He won the U.S. title, had matches with guys like Scott Norton, Dean Malenko, Ultimo Dragon.
Yeah. Which was another big name in the Cruiserweight division. Eddie had a lot of guys he worked for. And then when the NWO started taking over and he formed the LWO, which people didn't take seriously, but there was an LWO sign in the match of the week we just watched.
The LWO was getting over, but specifically Eddie was getting over.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think anybody really gave a fuck about anybody else but Eddie Guerrero at that point.
Yep. And then the Filthy Animals. WCW really wasted a lot of talent because I'm sure everybody here knows about the Eric Bischoff Eddie Guerrero meeting as a supposed cup of coffee in Eddie's face.
Yeah. But why don't you recall for the people?
So Eddie went to Eric Bischoff's office. And what had happened was that there were issues between the two of them. Eddie was not happy about the fact that he wasn't getting a push and a chance at the main event because he basically had been working the mid-card for a little bit of time.
And had been too small, and that was kind of Jericho's beef, and a lot of those guys who left's beef.
Right. And Guerrero wanted Bischoff to release him on an episode of Nitro. And when Eddie came back, he thought maybe there was a chance that Bischoff could, you know, do something. But then later on in that meeting, Guerrero realized it was never going to happen. And supposedly, this has always been in debate, is the whole thing of the coffee. Because apparently, Eric Bischoff had a coffee, and it landed in Eddie Guerrero's face. Supposedly, it was thrown at Eddie. Other accounts, even Eddie states that that Bischoff accidentally knocked the coffee off the table, and it was a complete accident that it hit Eddie.
I'm sure Bischoff has no memory of this. I'm sure he doesn't remember that conversation ever happening.
Now, it's stated in Eddie Guerrero's autobiography, so that's probably the source that I would take in the coffee accidentally being knocked over.
Yeah, I mean, if Eddie himself was like, he didn't throw it in my face, then it probably wasn't thrown in his face.
Right. Now, the whole thing about another wrestling what if Eddie had stayed in WCW and they pushed him in 2000, even if they pushed Eddie in 2000, there's no way in hell WCW would have survived.
Even if they pushed Eddie in 2000, you don't think that eventually one of those creative control contracts would have squashed the shit out of him anyway?
If it's not, it probably would have been Kevin Nash.
I was about to say, if there's one guy who I would claim would be the guy to powerbomb the shit out of Eddie Guerrero out of WCW, it'd be Kevin Nash.
Yep. Well, we get Eddie Guerrero in WWF with the Radicals, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn.
God, I feel bad for Perry. Perry should not have been put into that moppy situation because he was so good in WCW. And all four of those guys were good in WCW, but you could tell that the interest was way more into the personalities behind those four. So Perry wasn't going to make it. Dean wasn't going to make it. Benoit obviously had personality, which was a lot more exhibited the more that he worked, hence why he got the world title opportunities before anybody else did. And Eddie took a little time to warm up, but once they got it out of him, boy, did they get it out of him.
Well, yeah, but you also have to consider that after the first feud for the Radicals was the New Age Outlaws, Eddie Guerrero was involved in the whole China stuff.
Honestly, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. It was Eddie. Eddie was still being silly, but he was still enjoying the time. You could tell that he was having fun doing it. I'm not saying that being associated with China in 2000 and into 2001 was the best thing to go for, because that was when China realized that Triple H was fucking Stephanie, and that pretty much caused her downward spiral. But that had nothing to do with Eddie. Eddie just ended up kind of caught in the middle of that, and clearly it didn't hurt him any, because by the time the 2002 rolled around, he's still one of the more sought-after talents that is on the roster.
Well, the reason why he was sought after, well, again, Eddie did do a good enough job given what China was. He has ancillary feuds. He ends up winning the European title from Test, which,
European title at that point was pretty much dead, but it still felt more important on Eddie.
It did, but this was, and he did it at WrestleMania X7, which is arguably one of the greatest WrestleManias of all time.
Well, that would be a fun one to watch at some point, because everyone says it's the greatest WrestleMania of all time. I'm not sure that it is. We'd have to watch it again.
It's a lot of nostalgia.
Yeah, we'd have to see how we view it. I'm not saying we should do that one for this month, but at some point, we should watch WrestleMania X7 and we'll be the judge.
I mean, there's a lot of good stuff on it. Here, let me give you the match. Do you want the matches?
Well, let's just stick with Eddie here, because when we get to WrestleMania X7, you'll be able to hear it. So stay tuned, folks. The only way you're going to know what we feel about WrestleMania X7 is to like and to share and to subscribe and to hit that bell button, so that when we review WrestleMania X7, you will be the first to know.
Alrighty. But Eddie, at this point, started developing his addiction to painkillers, and he was involved in that car accident. So...
Right. Which started getting ahead of him. But in the same vein, he had his demons, but he pulled out of those demons.
Right.
In a lot of ways.
Now, here's the thing, is that he had pain addiction, medication, and also drunk driving issues. But because of this, he missed the entirety of the Invasion storyline, so we could argue that it was for the best.
He missed the Invasion storyline, and then he was briefly fired, if I recall, in right around that time, 2001, 2002, and he ended up having a ridiculous triple threat match. Have you seen this match? Here's the names.
CM Punk, Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero.
Yeah. Folks, go look for that match. Go watch that match. I'm not a huge fan of triple threats, but God, that one was fun. And it was before CM Punk was really CM Punk.
Yep. But it was matches like those that caught the idea and the eye of WWF. And that's why he got back in WWF in 2002. After basically like 2 years away, he came back to WWF with his cousin, Now, is it nephew Guerrero?
Nephew Chavo.
Yep. And he was wrestling with Chavo Guerrero as a tag team. The fact that he was feuding with Stone Cold, but Austin left before a match happened, that's disappointing.
I know. And you want to talk about wrestling what ifs. I occasionally think back to what that match would have looked like. Because it would have been something. And you know, I feel bad that they wanted Stone Cold to lose to Lesnar in the qualifying round of that King of the Ring, because that might be one of the most missed opportunity wrestling matches that we could have possibly gotten. Because that showed that they had some faith in Eddie. And that they wanted to do something with him of more prominence. And then that eventually turned into his feud with Edge, which was also terrific, a match of which we saw. And
well, the whole thing was that he was brought over to the SmackDown brand, and at the head of the time, the head of the SmackDown brand's creative team was Paul Heyman. And Paul Heyman, I remember he gave an interview to Edge and Chris Jericho back on Chris Jericho's podcast when it was good.
Right.
And Paul Heyman was like, okay, you're going to lose Chris Jericho because he's going to Raw. But who do you want on your roster? Paul Heyman looks at Vince McMahon, and who was the head of Raw creative at the time?
Oh God, you know, I can't remember now. I
think it had to be like Vince McMahon. It wasn't Russo, right?
No, because Vince wasn't there for too long. Although he was around, but he wasn't around because he was still doing that Mr. Wrestling 3 garbage with TNA.
Right. Anyways, the whole point is that Eddie and Benoit were two of the guys that Paul Heyman wanted, and he got laughed in the face by Vince McMahon. And Paul Heyman supposedly told both of those guys that, and they're like, let's show him.
Yeah.
And the famous quote of the SmackDown 6, Edge, Eddie Guerrero, Chavo Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit.
Yep. It was an incredible time. It was the SmackDown 6 was something that was very, very unique, and it wasn't even the main event of that show.
No, they were wrestling for the tag titles. There was a triple threat tag team match with all 6 of those guys for the titles that Los Guerreros won.
Yeah. It was just a different time, and Paul knew how to cultivate the strengths of all those individuals. You know, and that was
Survivor Series 2002.
Yep, the one that the Big Show won the title with.
Yep.
That was the main event, was Big Show and Brock Lesnar, with Paul Heyman turning on Brock to join Big Show, who he then turned on to join Kurt Angle.
I mean, again, if we're being honest, Sean, I told you that me and you could basically watch Ruthless Aggression pay-per-views in order for the next 4 to 5 years, and we'd just be happy.
I would. It would bring me joy. You know, one of the best parts, just before we get back to Eddie, because 2003 is when he really starts to develop the lie, cheat, and steal gimmick. Right before we get to that, one of the matches that's on that Survivor Series show is 3-Minute Warning and Rico versus the Dudley Boys and Spike. And it has one of my favorite ever Spike Dudley spots ever, because they basically catapult Spike, 3-Minute Warning does, from face down, flips him all the way up and over, and face first into a table. And it's one of the nastiest things I've ever seen. It's worth the watch. Another one that we should watch, Survivor Series 2002, before it became too much like the company softball game.
Before it became too much like the company softball game. And that was the first Elimination Chamber.
Yeah.
Actually, the Elimination Chamber was the main event.
Yeah. With Shawn Michaels' brown-ass pants and Triple H getting his larynx destroyed. Good times.
Oh, yeah.
Good times.
Yeah. But anyways, back to Eddie for a second. 2003, United States Championship, John Cena.
Yeah. One of those guys who helped John Cena along was Eddie, because Eddie could work with anybody. Anybody. And
again, the parking lot brawl, which I'm not a big fan of those types of things, but watching Eddie and John Cena fight with other guys in the background talking was one of the funniest things. JBL cracks me up during that whole parking lot brawl.
He's so loud. He's literally louder than the cars that are honking.
Yep.
But still, you still felt the energy. They still made that work. You know, that was one of the most amazing things about it. They still made it work because Eddie was that good.
And the best part is that Eddie Guerrero was doing the whole Eddie Guerrero lie, cheat, and steal heel gimmick. But people cheered for him.
Yeah.
People cheered for Eddie even though he was cheating. That's how over and charismatic he was.
Which is why when it came to No Way Out, they had the faith in him. Let's give him the belt. And he had a great run, had a hell of a match with Kurt at Mania 20 that does not get enough recognition because, well, you know.
Well, because Chris Benoit wins the triple threat match against Shawn Michaels and Triple H, and the lasting image of those two celebrating in the ring as the confetti flies down, and WWE can never mention it.
I know. And it's a shame because it's one of the best WrestleMania moments in history.
Yeah.
And they can't mention it. And that's such a shame. But Eddie has some good matches, and really, you know, everyone's going to say what they want about JBL, but Eddie made JBL.
I mean, yeah, Eddie Guerrero made JBL.
The gimmick, not the person, the gimmick.
The chair shot at Judgment Day.
Well, that's kind of on Eddie's fault, because he's the one who overbladed.
Yeah, and
I mean way overbladed. Like,
well, it's because he hit an artery, so.
Yeah. But it's
at least he was okay afterwards, but man.
Yeah, that I've watched that back since, and it's too much. It's too much. But honestly, I love the idea of the what was it, the bull rope match with the four corners. You know, that match was good. The finish to that was genius, I thought.
That's how you cheat out a title victory.
Yeah, so that JBL could win it, and then he held it for 9 months. You want to talk about Roman Reigns' title reign going too long. 9 months, JBL held that title. But
again, it led to more matches because Kurt Angle was the general manager of SmackDown and screwed over Eddie. It led to more Eddie and Kurt Angle, especially their SummerSlam match. That is another great match.
Yeah, another classic. You know, Eddie's 2004 was tremendous, and he never lost steam. During that whole time, he never lost momentum. And heading into 2005, Eddie still felt like one of the most important guys on the roster. To the point where he was tag champions with Rey, and they fought each other as tag champions at Mania, and it was tremendous.
It was tremendous. Again, Eddie Guerrero entering number 1 in the Royal Rumble of 2005. He was on fire in that match.
Yeah, also, I want to mention another underrated match. The Draft, 2004, Eddie Guerrero versus Triple H. Underrated match, but really good.
Oh, yeah, it's very, very good. And now, we get to arguably the most famous storyline and arguably the greatest heel work of Eddie Guerrero. Eddie versus Rey with son Dominic.
The best part about that whole feud is his revamped music for being a heel. That music does not get enough credit for being like, I'm a slime ball, but it's still, you're still hearing the same kind of tone as the Viva La Raza, but it lasted so short because he did the heel work with Rey and Dominic, and then that was about it.
Well, I think it was very specifically about Eddie and Rey. Also, there's a lot of fun stuff with Eddie's run, even though it was a short heel run. His Titantron was just Eddie Guerrero posing and beating up Rey Mysterio.
Yeah. That was it.
And I know in 2022, the stuff that Eddie was doing with Rey and Dominic was very, very gross. And you could argue it's child harassment. But at the time, it was some of the most vile things that was happening on WWE television.
Yeah, I mean, probably if something like that was attempted now, everyone would call poor taste, which it kind of was. But you still look at that SummerSlam ladder match. It was still pretty fun.
it was still a great match.
Until Vicky Mr. Q and Eddie got legitimately pissed. And you could hear him say, "Where the fuck is Vicky?"
And then you see Vicky running down, realizing she fucked up.
Yeah. She looked like Papa Shango at the main event of WrestleMania 8. To where Sid had to kick out of the leg drop. Oh, man. For custody of Dominic, no less.
Yeah.
And to the point, that angle was so good that it transferred itself to NWL.
I mean, the whole thing is that technically Dominic is still Eddie's son.
That's right. But the problem is that as much as people booed Eddie, people didn't really want to boo Eddie. Not really, which is why they turned him back babyface.
Well, they semi-turned him back babyface because the planned storyline was for Eddie Guerrero to cheat Batista out of the World Heavyweight Championship.
Which I feel like he still would have been cheered for, but we never got that.
Unfortunately, we never got it because he had a heart attack because of his earlier drug use. And have you seen that Dark Side of the Ring episode?
Yeah, of course. Of course. You know, where the point where he was just randomly nodding off. Just like mid-sentence, he'd nod off, and then he'd just come back up and like nothing had happened. And it was just circumstances. It was just a freak happenstance. And
yeah.
And I think that's the roughest part about it, is it just... And honestly, I don't know if there's a wrestling death that hit me harder than Eddie at the time.
No, ever.
Ever. Yeah, I mean, with the exception of maybe Bobby Eaton, because I really got hit by Bobby Eaton last year. But Eddie, I mean, there was nobody who wasn't crying when they found out that Eddie died.
It's one of the saddest things. I know Bobby Eaton's death was hard for you last year, but I would argue Eddie is worse because we were kids when we were watching Eddie. Like, he seemed like a mythical figure, but in hindsight, if you go back and watch the final days of Eddie Guerrero, you can see it. You can see it in his eyes how much pain he's in. Vicky telling the story on that Dark Side of the Ring that there were days where Eddie was just sitting on the couch and watching TV and couldn't move because of the pain.
Yeah. And
now we have to go into the wrestling what ifs, because that's what we have to do now with Eddie's career. Obviously, if Eddie had stayed alive, Rey Mysterio doesn't become as big as he does.
Nope. Not at all. He would never have gotten that world title push.
I mean, now, supposedly Eddie was supposed to win the world title. Do you want to know what was going to happen?
What's that?
I did some digging around and snooping around. Eddie Guerrero versus Shawn Michaels at Mania.
You know, I was just thinking about the fact that we never got an Eddie and Shawn match. It would have, I mean, the only thing that's, oh God, because when you think about 2006, that was after Shawn and Kurt had their matches. What a follow-up that would have been.
Yeah. Again, Eddie is 38 in 2005 when he died, so he could have kept wrestling for maybe another 7 years if we're really talking realistic.
Depends on how much his body kept up with him. Really.
But think of the think of the matches we didn't get. We didn't get prime John Cena versus Eddie Guerrero, which you know they would have gone to at some point.
Yep, they would have done prime Cena and Eddie. They probably would have done Legend Killer Orton versus Eddie.
Yeah, that definitely would have been one of the legends that he targeted. Let me throw a couple out there for you, and you're gonna cry when you hear these.
Yep, let's hear it.
Eddie Guerrero versus CM Punk.
Well, at least we got that one in some form, but
we didn't get prime CM Punk.
Yeah, that would have been something. That definitely would have been something. I almost feel like we would have gotten a rematch with Eddie and JBL.
Probably. Here's another one I was thinking of, and I'm like, it would have been very much stretching it, but I think it could have happened. 2010, Eddie Guerrero versus Daniel Bryan.
That would have been something. I also think that there would have been a good possibility that we might have seen Eddie try to beat the streak.
Eddie and The Undertaker, shit.
At Mania, no less. You know,
you could have done that after the Shawn Michaels matches.
Yep. I think we probably could have gotten Eddie versus the Rated R Superstar Edge.
Yep. Now, there's one more wrestling what if. I don't know if this is going to be the thing that tips in the favor, but we have to bring the elephant into the room. Are you ready, Sean?
Let's do it.
I don't know if Eddie being around would have caused Chris Benoit to stay alive, but maybe there was a chance he could have stayed alive longer.
Well, by all accounts, it seems like Eddie's death was really that straw that broke the camel's back for Chris. But I don't necessarily know whether the concussions wouldn't have done the job anyway.
That probably would have been the case because Chris Benoit had major depression issues caused by the concussions, but also Eddie's death.
Yeah, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. I mean, you could make the case that maybe he wouldn't have taken, maybe it would have just been a suicide instead of taking his wife and kid along with him. You know, I'm not sure that Benoit lives much longer regardless in that case. It was really, I mean, Eddie was obviously what really took the soul out of Chris Benoit. There's no doubt about that. That's been well documented. But who knows? It's hard to say. It's hard to say. We'll never know. We'll never know what could have been in that respect and what would have done for either of those men's careers, or whether they would have had one much longer after those moments.
It's hard to tell because, again, Eddie died so soon. He died at 38 and was still putting on some of the best matches of his career. Had Eddie had stayed alive longer, he probably would have won the world title at least 2 or 3 more times.
There's a fair chance that that's true.
Probably would have had all the feuds that we just mentioned, like feuds with Edge, John Cena, The Undertaker, CM Punk, Shawn Michaels.
But we also don't know whether some other incident would have occurred. I mean, that's the other part of this, too. It's like he could have had something else happen that might have forced him to retire. You know, maybe he gets on the outs with Vince and goes to TNA and wrestles Kurt Angle and Booker T and Samoa Joe and AJ Styles.
Shit.
You know, there's so many options that he could have had with just not even 7, with 5 more years in the business that we unfortunately didn't get, but at the same time, he didn't get his reputation ruined. Think about how fondly we look at Eddie Guerrero now because of when he passed and how he passed. He never became a shell of himself the way that a lot of wrestlers do in their advancing age.
I would guess, personally, that Eddie Guerrero probably would have stopped wrestling the second he couldn't do it any longer.
Yeah.
Because he is the type of guy, and this is just from me reading from what he does and how he is, I don't think he would have been kind to... If he was suffering from that much pain, I don't know necessarily that he would want to keep doing it.
Yeah. No, I agree. And so, in a weird way, maybe it's for the best that he went when he did. I mean, you never want to see that. You never want to hear that. And obviously, it caused a ripple effect in the entire industry. But at the same time, think about all the good that's come out of Eddie Guerrero since.
I mean, the whole thing's that Eddie, even with his death, is still one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. You cannot dispute that. Where he is in that hierarchy, who knows? But Eddie's one of the best luchadors ever, one of the best wrestlers to translate to America, really influenced an entire generation of people.
Yeah. And we miss him to this day. We just wish his name wasn't used in the way that it's used currently, because they will not let him go. And I wish they would.
I know. There are ways to pay respects to Eddie, but the ways they are doing it is just too much.
Yeah. It's over the top. It's been so long now. At this point, let the man rest. We love you, Eddie. We miss you, Eddie. And that's, I think, all we can really say about it.
Viva la Raza.
Viva la Raza, indeed. Well, Skylar, the good thing is, I believe that next week, if I'm reading my calendar correctly, next week is the third week of the month.
It is.
And now, here's the interesting thing. With May, we've got a couple, actually, if I'm looking at this, because this is going to be airing on May 9th. On the 16th, I actually have a special edition. So I'm going to propose to you, Sky, that we don't actually do ACPW and NWL until the 23rd. Because my boy, Abizzle, is going to Raw on the day that this premieres. He's going to our competition. And so...
Wait, he's watching the Raw after Backlash?
He's going to the Raw after Backlash.
Wow.
So, because he's been on SmackDown, we are going to get an exclusive interview. We're going to try and have him in the chat, like, on our show, recording on the night that we normally do. So that he can tell both of us and hear and field questions from both of us about his experience on Monday Night Raw, which will be headlined by Cody versus Seth Rollins.
Because you need me to be there to give you the research information.
Well, we'll have to see. It's going to be a lot better than him cooking a stew in the middle of the interview, which is what happened the first time. So we're going to have all three of us together. He's going to give us his insights. We'll be able to ask him questions, field him questions and answers, and he'll be able to give us the entire breakdown. So stay tuned for another exclusive interview from the most casual of fans come next week. But next week is when we're going to reconvene because, Sky, we've broken 2 hours, and I don't know about you, but with all of this great wrestling talk we've got, I'm a bit exhausted.
I am too. And people, if you are exhausted, then you also need to take the break. But before you do, please like, share, and subscribe so that way you can listen to next week's show, which will be a good one. Sean, thank you for coming with me on this lucha-inspired episode.
Well, thank you for driving, and thank you for letting me take over the news for a week, and I'm excited that we got to do this, and here's to many more to come.
Right, so let's do a little bit of a cleanup real quickly. So this is May 9th. The next episode is going to be May 16th with Abizzle.
Yes.
Well, we'll see. And then NWL, ACPW, May 23rd. And May 30th, we'll see. I mean...
It's our old school pay-per-view review. What pay-per-view? You gotta like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell button to find out.
Exactly. But until then, let's take our first commercial break.